So LinkedIn is amazing because I connected with Erik, a fellow Dane, a global Dane. I will call Erik. He will tell the story in a moment himself. And we met up in London. We had this amazing conversation about a new world and what we needed to do as leaders to get us there. We really need to take action to take care of people, society, and the planet. But we're going to be talking about regenerative food and agriculture today and hear a bit about how Erik actually ended up being so passionate about that and actually how his journey was built on that. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the challenge ahead for us and then actually making sure that we actually get some concrete things out of this that we can go and action on as leader. But first of all, welcome, Erik. I'm super excited we make this happen because I know we both are trying to get a schedule together. But I think this is going to be an absolutely amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you, Michael, for inviting me into the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Erik, for people to get a bit of context, could you give them like the top line of your story and how it ended up with being all about food and agriculture and regenerative farming in the last couple of years?
Well, my genesis story is that I really wanted to become global when I was a small boy in the north of Denmark. And that led to a career in global commodity shipping. It led to a career in FMCG, setting up dairy exports from Denmark to South America and North America. And when I ended up in London thinking I needed to go into technology, somehow food came back creeping in. At this point, I'd sort of had a bit of a very young revolution inside myself saying that we need to create a better world, having seen what I had seen from the Amazon to intensive food production in Brazil and Argentina. I thought there must be a better way to do this. And since I was a brand guy, I ended up doing organic food. And that led me to setting up ventures on myself as an entrepreneur, but also helping great visionary people within the space to create their businesses. My first client was then Prince of Wales, now King Charles III. Yeah. Who has been a great advocate for a more sustainable food production throughout. And for me, that became a double win because not only did I get to do what I really like to do, but I also get to learn a whole lot about how food is connected to soil, how soil is connected to our well-being, and how food can be transformative when you reconnect it with humans and planet. And that was 24 years ago. So my journey has gone far and wide. I've set up Wise Organic, tried to connect amazing farming communities on Long Island and the Hamptons with the affluent customer base that are out there. I have worked to reposition Linda McCartney Foods, which was arguably the first vegetarian mass market brand in the world. Yeah. Created Meat Free Monday to persuade global consumers that eating less intensive meat needs to happen for us to have a future. And I was hitting 50 a few years ago and asked myself, had I really changed the world? Well, changing the world, setting up beautiful cafes for Dalesford Organic or perpetuating Hakkasan around the world is not going to change anything. So I said, fine, I have to deep dive into the big food again. So I called my friend at Danone. At the same time, friends at the Danish Sovereign Wealth Fund came along to ask me to do a change role within the fund, put in a holistic lens to the fund's investment. And with Danone, I quickly assessed that our existing big food, big delivery platforms, commodity-dependent platforms, are simply not a viable option. And retrofitting super tankers to be small deployable RIPs are not going to happen. So at the Sovereign Fund and other activities alongside of it, I began slowly to go into the world of finance and how finance can help transform the way that we farm and produce food and fiber across the world. Because we can go into this in great length, but obviously one key aspect of where it's gone wrong is because we have intensified the way that we produce food and fiber.
Yeah.
75% of all biodiversity loss is due to our farming system. Most of our 30% of our global greenhouse gas emission, take it or leave it, comes from the farm system to produce food for us, but moreover to produce food for our food. So produce food for livestock.
Yeah.
It has produced a world where only 4 to 6% of all living, organic matter, mammals, are actually wild animals and wild species. And 96% are human beings and animals that serve human beings. And that's a terrifying statistic. And we've known this for a while. And so that's where I am right now on my journey.
Can you, because when I met you in London, I can't remember, was it 4 months ago, we had lunch and we talked about this, and I went away and I thought it was so interesting because I'd never thought about that. Actually, you need to be around the financing of the infrastructure to really make the change. And there's a couple of other conversations I had prior to yours now. It all came together in a way. And actually, we can't fight it from the front line, or we need to fight it from both sides, but we actually need to get how we fuel these organizations in place. Can you talk a bit more about that work you're doing now, where you actually are changing the financing model? Because I think there's I meet a lot of people who want to make change, if it's farmer or restaurant owners or retail people, but in a way, they've just been told, computers says no, that's not how we make money.
And that's a model that is really based on the fact that we are borrowing from future abundance to create abundance now. And so what will happen ultimately is that these systems will drive into scarcity and disappear. And I'll explain why. We have currently a biodiversity loss, which has brought us into the 6th mass extinction. We're now talking that we are in the age of the Anthropocene. That means a world that has solely been left in the power of one species on Earth, and that's human beings. We can either mitigate and begin to restore some of the damage, or we can continue with business as usual and face a very scarce world. And that is connected directly into the way that we have deployed capital, and capital is energy, as we know. So right now, I was in front of pension funds the other day, representing 5 trillion euros, an unimaginable amount of money. But essentially, you and I, our savings, quadrupled into large-scale fund holders, asset owners that are then deploying their capital through asset managers. And if you look at the way that the global economy is structured, then half or more than half of the global economy, which I did the calculation with ChatGPT, should be around $68 trillion, is highly or moderately depending on a highly functional ecosystem. That goes from the food is an obvious one. 75% of all our crops depend on that nature pollinating it for us. But moreover, if you look at what pension funds hold, they are representing about $60 trillion. Most of that portfolio is left there to perpetuate value creation on the long run, because we as pensioners want to retire in 10, 20, 30 years with some kind of endowment to make that happen. But at the same time, we know that half the real economy is depending on biodiversity, and 90+% of that portfolio that we have put into our pensions are driving the killing of life on Earth as we know it, i.e., we're not going to have any returns in a few years because it's going so fast. And what does that mean for hospitality? Well, it means people go into a world of scarcity. They have to rearrange the way they spend money. Disposable incomes goes down. Discretionary spending, hospitality goes down. At the same time, you are seeing the COGS, the fundamental, input cost that goes into hospitality will continue to rise because our commodity-dependent input system of cheap, chemically produced food, that cost will no longer be cheap and no longer be available in the same volume as we have experienced it thus far, thus driving up the cogs of the industry. So you're not even you're in a double down disaster scenario. Within a few years, this is going to hit all sectors of the economy, but particular for your audience, the hospitality sector and the food sector, it's going to be the first one in line because it's the ones directly depending on a highly functioning ecosystem. So, bottom line, what I'm doing is really to establish nature, a price for nature. Because if we price nature and nature's services to man, we can begin to value it. Right now, we don't value it. Pollination, someone has done an estimate, annually is contributing $500 billion to the economy. So nature is providing $500 billion of free capital into our markets. That's nowhere to be found. And when that's 400 and 300 and 200, we begin to feel it, but still is a free service. It's using nature as in a slavery system, essentially, free labor. Yeah. And the stupid thing is that we are not taking care of our slaves. We're actually just killing it.
Yeah.
Giving it more scarcity. So what I've done is like, okay, well, how I'm going to change this is like more than, for us to comprehend, which is also the reason why, companies and organizations, individuals are not changing. I really started, because I'm very pragmatic, starting at 2 entry points of changing large-scale management practices on landscape. One is joining as an operating partner in private equity fund called Regenerative Asset Management. The fund is called Regenerative European Sustainable Agriculture. And what we do is we buy farmland and we take them from being intensive or degraded into becoming regenerative. And that means a full regenerative. So that means we want to transition to a place where we have zero input costs and we're providing all the fertility and all the, I would say, the balancing services. So pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides, all of that will be managed by nature. And that way we are getting a much better input cost production. And ultimately, we will also be having a resilience in the marketplace that enables us to, at scale, to supply the market with products that are more resilient in supply. What does that mean? It means that when there's droughts or floods or big climate events, which is going to happen, we are not as volatile as the farm next door, who's depending on a linear, zero-sum fighting against nature system. That's one thing. The other thing is that I'm working hard with the Savory Institute, which is an institute that have refined the management of livestock with the sole purpose of providing more profits to ranchers and farmers. And while doing that, in the process, they're regenerating the soil. Because what has happened is that as part of this industrial revolution, we have plowed our grasslands and made them croplands, and we've taken our animals, livestock, while the wild ones were killed. The domestic ones we put in pens, and we are force feeding them whatever we are producing on those arable farms. Well, that system can't be sustained. It's simply unsustainable. So turning large landscapes, and we're talking about millions and millions of hectares of the world's surface, back into highly productive grasslands, both for domesticated livestock but also for wildlife, enables us to not only, it's a win-win-win all across, to sequester an enormous amount of carbon, leaving methane in the ground. And yes, livestock have methane emission, but that methane would otherwise be emitted from rotting organic matter on the ground. And most people don't understand that. I won't go into that. But having a really highly productive ecosystem over a few years which enable to bring back biodiversity, hold more water, more resilience to drought and floods and fires, and also produce food and fiber for people. So those are my two hats at the moment. I think my third hat really is to work within the financial industry to cut back the time it will take for some of these new emerging markets like regenerative agriculture to be a fully investable asset for institutional investors, i.e. pension funds or big endowments that signed only 100 million euro checks. And we don't have time for those markets to appear. So what I'm trying to do is take some of those asset owners, bring them closer to the market, and take the actors that enable that sort of value chain to appear and try and get this capital to talk together and co-create.
Yeah, there's lots of things in there, Erik. I want to ask some extra questions on, because you talked about, you're buying up farmland, which is really an interesting model. Is that small farms you're creating, or is that big scale farms, or is it a group of small farms working in cohesion with each other? And where in the world is this happening?
So the Reserve Fund by Regenerative Asset Management is solely focused on Europe because we have the conditions in Europe. And thus far, we also have a very good framework in the Green Deal, which, thank God, looks like it's holding after the parliamentary elections. It was a very pivotal one. We also have biodiversity legislation coming along, like the nature restoration law that was just approved this week by Council of Ministers. So we have a lot of things going for these models in Europe, and that means de-risking essentially in our model.
Yeah.
The size of the farm is, first of all, geography. So we are trying to create a portfolio stacking, which you would, if you're talking a fund, would like to have a portfolio that is de-risked in the type of assets that we invest in. And the type of assets in this place is land and infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we will have some very mature farms that has got a cash flow, which is the case of the land we bought in Portugal. So that's a large-scale blueberry farm. In Spain, we will go for a large-scale combination farm. Sort of the main crop will be tree crop, so high-value commodities like pistachios, almonds, maybe some Iberian ham, because we need livestock in all our systems.
Yeah.
And that's the average farms would be around 2,000 hectares. So we'll probably have a combined landmass of 6,000 hectares in Spain. And then we begin to look to Northern Europe, where we're looking at dairy, among other places in Denmark, where you have a very intensive system that needs to change and do a true regenerative dairy piece.
Yeah, I can see also that's quite ambitious strategy, because we all know that the dairy industry is quite set in its way. It's like that super tanker you talked about that's trying to turn in a river, and it's very hard, and it really needs some change. What is it that what do you see? Because it seems like the picture looks quite scary, and some of the things you said around ultra processed food is already a reality, but actually it's getting on the agenda by the consumer. So I think that's a positive thing. The top 5 book on Amazon last year was ultra processed people. And it was really interesting that actually people are reading about this. This is actually people starting asking questions. I see it with our business, like chefs are asking, is there any fake meat? Is this ultra processed? What do you do? And then we can say with happiness, no, it's all natural, just pulses and so on. But do you see that actually that there's a pickup in change, both from consumers, businesses? Because I guess it doesn't feel like far away we are at a tipping point in some kind of way. From what you're saying.
I think in many ways we're at the cusp of some drastic changes, and I really would appeal to the large consumers of produce So we're talking about in your business, it's the Aramarks, it's the Compass, it's the Sodexos of this world. Will go in like the big food companies are doing right now, is work back in the value chain. So go back to the farm. And of course, by any means right now, they cannot hope of satisfying current demand with what's out there. But the farming piece needs capital. And so this is really where a closer relationship, like I was talking about, to do it in the capital value chain, do this in the food value chain. At the moment with Regenerate and our farms, we are speaking to a couple of pan-European retailers to do a piece of forward contracts supply for at least part of the harvest, so that you de-risk the production end of the farm.
Yeah.
And I would also appeal that you set up some kind of capital structure so you can future buy part of that supply. Because what is needed right now is transition financing. So screaming that the farming end needs to change while they're delivering 2% margin plus minus.
Yeah.
And all the profits with the input companies. So all the profits currently in the farming systems are with genetics companies and the people providing fertilizer and chemical pesticides and fungicides and other things.
Yeah.
That's where the profit lands. And that profit needs to shift to the farm level. But that transition to wind yourself off the heroin, if I may call it so, because it has a complete and utter dependency from our farming system to whatever is served up on the plate from these people. That needs to happen. I will work on these big funds to divest from big ag if the industry itself, if the food value chain and fiber, I would throw in the apparel companies as well, if they can begin to create closer relationship at the farm end. And that also means to figure out ways to capitalize this transition, because it will take 3 to 5, up to 7 years to transition a production system from one input dependent to input independent. That takes time. And part of that is a learning process for the farmer, because, we're asking truck drivers to fly planes.
Yeah.
And so we need to provide manual and training, because that's not going to happen by itself.
I think I've been to a couple of events last week, and it just got reminded. And I think a lot of people don't understand how you just mentioned, +2 or -2 profit on the bottom line for a farmer. So it actually comes down to survival. And there was a farmer from France that was talking about how changed the whole farm. It was great. It was a great story. But he only has €800 to live off a month for his family when he's done. So he's done this amazing change for people, society, and the planet. But actually, he's actually scraping by. He's not even surviving. He's on credit cards and so on. But he believes so much in what he do, he will continue. But he said, that's why the change is not happening as well, because we just can't finance our life, And then some farmers give up. Others just say, when the land dies of too much heroin, call it that, too much fertilizer, they go and do something else. And then we've lost another passionate farmer. And it's as tough as running restaurants, I would say, if not tougher now.
It's probably tougher because you have more freedom as a restaurateur. Farmers are in straitjackets. In many cases, you're locked into an IP system. So you will get to genetics, whether it be arable crops or fruit or whatever you're producing, or even animals. And you'll be forced to sell once you've grown it to an IP company that will buy it at you at a certain price. In USA, it's famously the Monsanto model that sort of, lock farmers into contracts that progressively got worse and worse. Yeah. Once they were depending on the system, and there was no way for them to get out of it. And these systems they're hugely profitable for the one providing it. Great. And this is also why the system continues, because people keep wanting to invest in these things.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't? It's like a sovereign system.
Yeah.
It's backed by taxpayers.
Yeah.
You know, whenever the farmers is making a loss, taxpayers bails them out. And who skims the same profit? The people provided that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it's just morally wrong.
Yeah.
It's just morally wrong, and nobody's questioning it, because it's something people have stopped understanding, is how we're producing food and fiber.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a recipe, I think strategically for anybody in hospitality, whether you are a big, a big food service provider, if you're a big restaurant chain, or you're an independent chain, the story is still the same. How can you differentiate? How can you make sure that your supply is safe in this paradigm, in this future that we described? Because supply is going to keep getting more expensive. And right now, and it's not going to be linear. And right now, food inflation is down in the UK, as an example, where we're both resident. But you're going to see that tumble at the first, next harvest, where we have rains or we have droughts, and it's just going to keep upsetting. And there's only one way: the curve will keep going up.
I think from a food inflation, I think many talks about is not double-digit raises anymore, but it's stabilized at that level. So your cost has just become 14-15% more expensive producing food, and that's not going to go down. I think a lot of people thought it would go up, and then it would slowly go down again.
It's stabilized.
It's stabilized. So it's 20% or 15% you need to find somewhere else in your organization.
So it's about you talk about the intrinsic dependencies within nature. And I think I want to just address what is biodiversity, because most of us think that is a one-to-one relationship, right? You take one species out, then another species die, and that again is another species. But biodiversity is an explosion in the dependencies that we're just beginning to understand. Somebody from the Savory Institute gave me this the other day. Taking one species out means a detrimental effect on more than 4,500 other species.
Wow.
From microbial, fungi, to all the species that we like to watch on television. So one species out affects 4,500 plus other species.
Wow.
Right?
That's like the synergy effect of that, like bad or good, is like extreme.
So what do we do? I mean, my garden that I just left this morning, I have just stopped mowing the lawn and created, some small paths through it. But I have 4 or 5 different types of songbirds right now. I have counted 15 different species of bees. Nature comes back, but you have to allow it. So we come back to the individual level. I think an individual level probably will have to mean taking effect on the land that we control, the balconies in the cities, or stop mowing your lawn, bring nature back, give nature space, give it breathing space. And that, and then we can figure out how to change the entire system in the meantime. But right now we're in a sense of emergency. Yeah, is it hopeless? Yes, but nothing in life is linear, and nature really have taught us that. So, we shouldn't stop because it seems hopeless. We should keep striving and put on the smiles every morning and get the bucket and try and empty out that hull of the Titanic, because ultimately that's the only thing we've got, being a metaphor for planet Earth. And then enjoy ourselves and create this. We're talking about the deeper collaboration to make this happen, and it's never been more urgent. And I don't know in how you can articulate that in a different way. I think you have to just do action. Reach out to the people you know are your allies, who are they willing and able to do this, whether it be a buyer within the chain that you're working in.
Is there, Erik, is there any best case, if we take it down from from the big things down to hospitality. We've been down touching a couple of times. Is there anything you can see that, like your hospitality operator, you are in the last chain before the consumer? What could they do in all this to like have like a positive impact? There's like some top learnings you've seen that actually their action can go all the way back to the farm, and we can start seeing this transition.
You're seeing, my traditional sort of playground has been the retail space. So if you're looking at supermarkets right now doing a really concerted jobs of creating alliances with farmers and setting up programs to help farmers transition, that's happening with Amidst, that's happening with Waitrose, and across Europe that's also happening. I don't know about any contract catering companies that are currently doing. I know Compass have begun to look at it, and many of them have begun to go down that road. With Regenerate, we had the head of, and it's typically the head of sustainability that cares about this. So actually, and I've had a big think about how you change that paradigm, because the CSO or CSR responsible, ESG responsible, are never the ones that's close to the business. And this is a fundamental strategic issue for the business. But as long as the buyer is rewarded by buying at quantities at a set price, and that's the KPIs, that's never going to change. So you actually have to allow and give both KPI permission, but also like endorsement and incentivize the buying link and the customer link to get them on a journey as well. That's really what I would recommend. And that means maybe short-term sacrificing some profits. And in public companies, that's very, very hard to do. So you also have to educate your board. You have to educate your shareholders for that to happen. So it's probably a lot easier to do in the private sector, but nobody's going to go first, because at the moment it's incurring extra costs to go on this journey. But I think we are at the point where I would say that you can't afford not to becomes kind of the mantra, rather than you're not going to go first because you can't afford to, because you can't afford not to do it, because you're not going to have a business. You'll not be able to generate sales and generate profits from alluring. This is not 20 years ahead we're talking. And when I'm at these conferences and I stand with a Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Institute, the godfather of planetary boundaries, and he's saying that we're a few years away from having 2 billion migrants moving from where they live because they can't live there because of temperature and water. Then we need to listen, because that affects the entire chain. And we might feel that we are isolated in Europe, and it's hard to change because we just like to get our head down and keep doing what we've done. But that's no longer an option as far as I see it. Especially you want to run a profitable business. So my recommendation, and mind me, I've been in this space for a long time, wanting to see the change happen. I've never seen a time where it's more important that change actually is actioned underground. Because climate is one thing. We talk about climate when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, but climate is linked to everything else. It's linked to the water cycles. It's linked to biodiversity. It's linked to everything. Biodiversity is something we need to pay close attention to, because it's a ticking time bomb under our entire civilization. And by that, I mean the entire economy. As I said, half the economy is directly dependent. If the natural world goes, then the economy goes, and then our civilization goes. And I know I'm speaking in very macro terms. But that statement alone means, if you want to operationalize that, begin to understand what's going on, begin to understand how this will affect your supply chains, your pricing, your consumers, your customers, your business 360. Because in a few years, you probably won't get any more olive oil, or you won't be able to get more, or you won't be able to afford vanilla or cacao or coffee.
Yeah.
All of those major commodities are in rapid decline because of nature.
Yeah, the cost is exploding. I know a guy
You've
that
seen
runs
the coffee
chocolate
prices and
business,
the chocolate prices recently. It's just,
yeah.
and we're just seeing the beginning.
Yeah.
And then you can go into your business, your P&L, and said, well, how much of our profits come from coffee in the country catering space? It actually means something.
Yeah.
So the fact that Illy and Nestlé are creating, very close ties and are spending billions right now at securing supply means that you should listen further up the chain.
And it doesn't mean they succeed with it. That's also another thing, because
and it's really, these, like I said, super tankers rarely, succeed in becoming rips.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. The agility by which, and this is probably where the independent sector is at an advantage, because it's a lot easier to change and pivot when you have a smaller mass that needs to move,
We had here on the show, I had Jonathan Davis from Levy, who's part of actually Compass Group, and they actually building a journey of where they actually are sponsoring or sending money to a farm to experiment. How can they actually grow some of their own vegetables, and how can they get small farmers involved? And they're working with a guy called Dr. Vincent, also been on the show. And Jonathan is really trying to lead that agenda. And he's coming on soon again. I talked with him 3 years ago, and it's going to be interesting to see where they are now. And I think they are at a second farm in a way. So they are moving, they're exploring how can they actually secure their own supply chain. And in conversation with people, I know that like the olive oil, tomatoes is another one. Tomatoes, olive oil, we are in food production. My business I'm involved are heavy depending on that. And we're really looking at those two commodities in itself and say, okay, what the hell are we going to do if that suddenly quadruples or double? Just that's enough to kick the bottom out of many things. So it's really, really interesting to see actually there is some people out there at small scale doing it. But what I heard last week as well is that how do we actually get a united front on this as an industry, so we are not trying to work in silos, and how do we actually learn from each other quicker and get away from this competitive mindset to a more collaborative mindset?
Absolutely. It's going to be very hard for some to get into a collaborative mindset, and that is just the nature of it. I think, I've always been a proponent of surrounding myself with like-minded people, because like-minded people tends to elevate. We elevate each other.
Yeah.
We learn from each other. We don't necessarily need a transactional relationship. Transaction should not be the entry point.
No.
Transaction becomes the added benefit of engaging with heart, not mind.
Yeah.
I'm also a proponent of going from our masculine mindset into a feminine mindset. And that means really embracing collaboration and getting from our heads into our hearts, and to generate business from there.
Yeah.
Because what is business for? It's really to sustain family, secure intergenerational wealth, to make sure that, we as an individual, but moreover, we within a broader community are thriving.
Yeah.
And that should be the purpose of it. And the same goes for the finance, which sort of underpins that. The common bit is underpinned by finance. Finance has moved into a size where we are slaves to the system rather than the system being slaves to us. It should be servicing people and planet.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be servicing a few at the top or wherever that happens to be. It's also pension funds and our endowment. But I think as we go into these systems begin to collapse, and I think Mother Nature will make sure that we get some shocks, and we have to react to those shocks. like we reacted to COVID.
Mm.
A little viral thing that happened in a corner of the world. All of a sudden, we all have behavioral change. And all of our financial systems and our communal pot called the tax systems were able to change and modify overnight. I just hope that we can do less emergency measures and more preventative and mitigation measures.
Yeah.
Because we have right now we have the excess, the surplus, the abundance to actually be able to do that. Once we are in a world of scarcity, it becomes increasingly harder. The ream by which we can maneuver is going to be a lot smaller. And but also a scarcity world actually brings some amazing new creativity and concepts. So we know that as a fact, human beings thrive and survive when we have scarcity. That's how we were made. That's how our brain works.
Pain or pleasure. Yeah.
Exactly. And we know it as entrepreneurs because that is this force that drives us, right?
Yeah.
We hit a wall, we climb it, or we pounce through it, or we navigate around it. So hold it. Yes, it's doomsday. It's doomsday for what? It's doomsday for the people who want to maintain status quo. Status quo is never a good place to be. So we have to evolve. We have to be smart. We have to figure out how to circumnavigate and create new systems, because we're talking about doing instrumental change to an existing system. Maybe a compass doesn't need to do what a compass is doing today, or a McDonald's is doing what it needs to do. Then maybe it can repurpose itself to do something completely different.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been amazing infrastructure
that we've figured that one out.
Yeah, there's amazing infrastructures in these kind of businesses, and that's also why the change need to be happening there, because there is these very, very heavy infrastructures that really can shift something very quickly if a decision is made in the boardroom. Oh, and actually, that leading to me another question I want to ask you. One of the last question, Erik, was like, okay, you talk about this change, this transition. I guess also a whole paradigm about how we think organizations has to change. Because right now, as you said, we very much think about profit maximization, sending that up to the 2% of the wealthiest people, but also how we actually structure these organizations needs to be totally changed, because they have to be financed differently.
Agree. Gosh, where do I start? Because we also live in an age where we have released artificial intelligence, and we are both, in the Western world on the learning path of what that means to our reality. We have, I think I just appeal to our creativity. I mean, nature is the most ingenious system, and it works on intrinsic interdependencies, and it flows, and it's powered by the sun, which is perpetual and never stops. That's a system we need to keep. Everything else is made up. All our systems are made up. So the question is, could we dare to go into a place where we start reimagining the way that we have created this society and created our food system and created our hospitality system? Could we reimagine it? The most profitable businesses are people who reimagine things, who go into new spheres, and people say they're crazy, couldn't be done, or people won't buy it, or, why not? So I think we are in a why not moment. Step into our power. Lead markets, lead societies, lead consumers, lead diners to a place they otherwise wouldn't go. Make it exciting. Make it fun. It doesn't have to be doomsday. We can do much better.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the hope you talked about earlier. We need to have an active hope about, and we can still, what we can do as an individual, as leaders, we can maybe, building that organization that can actually manage to create this change. And it's really interesting. Ari Weinswijk from Singerman's read a blog about, he's been on the podcast a couple of times, but I read a blog where he talked about the organization is starting for him to evolve in like a garden, a biodynamic system of different things that's going together. And it's not about who owns what, where the power structure is, exactly how all these different things in the garden is working together. And they just transitioned the business from an ownership of the two founders to all of the employees, or the core of the employees, the partners. It was really interesting. And actually it was to avoid, he said, he was very clear, to avoid Amazon inspiring us and destroying our ecosystem. So how do we actually make sure that ecosystem of how to work together and take care of the local community and the planet in the best possible way we can continues the day the two founders is not there anymore. And they are in their 60s now. And it's like such an interesting way of looking on organization, and all these different businesses, there's 17 of those, have their own life within that garden. And I just think that's like fascinating thinking. And they've been on this journey for 40 years, and now they're starting to write about it and share their learnings. But 20 years ago, they decided they will not follow the growth model of, linear growth, doing one concept or just work. It has to be something where the synergies between the different businesses and nature and the local area survive. And I think that's the best example I've seen, like in a food context, how that impacts the supply chain.
It's extraordinary what it releases to be brave enough to go into a system. We call it nature mimicry as a industry term, but go into a place where you let things flow and where you let things come out of heart and not out of mind.
Yeah.
Out of feeling and not out of thinking. And I think the biggest con of our times is that we have the idea that human beings are logical, rational thinking people, and that came with industrialization. We're not. We're emotional, feeling, irrational people with a huge imagination. So why not? It's amazing. It's so inspiring when people do that, because they have to have such bravery to work outside the mold.
Yeah.
And do stuff that is hugely unpopular and people don't understand. But those people who now just became part of the business and shareholders, they understand.
Yeah.
And giving people agency to go there and giving people a voice to go there would create a revolution. Yeah. And I really think that that's the solution we have, rather than spending more time and barricading ourselves and spending 2% of our GDP on arms, because it's not a solution for humankind. It's human and it's kind. We are kind.
Yeah.
So let's build on that. I mean, my positive end note, I think, is that humans are kind and we are so creative. Yeah, and we have forgotten it.
Yeah, I love the, actually, funny enough, somebody else, Erik, just on the show said, it was actually Carl Johan, the previous CEO of Meyer, now responsible for Noon and Banegården in Copenhagen. He said, it's the one thing you can do in this crazy world right now. Just be kind to yourself, kind to others. That's what we need to get to a better place.
And I love what they created in Banegården.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It is an example of actually they are on a similar journey as you will see with Singerman's. And I pointed Carl Johan in that direction as well. There's so much to learn from there. But Erik, thank you so much for that. Is there a last thing that you wished I'd asked you? And what would it be? And what would the answer be?
I think you've sort of hacked my brain in the sense of moving from the extreme macro into the very operational. And I think as human beings and living in this time and this age, and especially if you're working within the food industry, this is what we need to tap into. We need to have a wider understanding, broaden our horizon, use our creativity. And I'm going to rub the Carl Johan ending and just be kind.
Yeah.
Lead with the heart.
Yeah, and again, I loved you said as well. There's still hope, so it's not like we're not trying to scare people. There is hope if we take action, and that's the only thing we have in principle.
Exactly. Get on with it.
where can people connect with you if they thought, oh, I'd rather like to talk with Erik about something, I have a great idea, or I would like to just see what you're doing and follow your journey. And you do a lot of great things on LinkedIn, just a way to the audience that want to know more about that. There's a lot of learning of following Erik and see his journey and where he travels around.
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Erik Bruun Bindslev. Or you can connect with me through my website, which is Merika, MERIKA.UK. And it's got all the contact details there.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes as well, Erik. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sending you power, energy, and love for the journey ahead. And see you soon.
See you soon. Thanks, Michael.